9 Insulate Britain activists are due to be sentenced after they admitted breaching High Court injunctions designed to prevent disruptive protests, specifically those on the capital's road network. Sentences for contempt of court can be a maximum of 2 years in jail and an unlimited fine. Well, Insulate Britain activists say they will continue to block roads at the earliest opportunity if they are not sent to prison.
Yes, well, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, is actually outside the High Court at the moment and has the latest. Mark, tell us what the sentence handed down by the judges.
Yeah, well, they've all been jailed. It is a very significant development here. First of all, I'm going to apologise because you're going to hear a pneumatic drill that is just started up here, which is horrifically loud, but I'll try to persevere. These 9 Insulate Britain protesters, the first of a group of protesters who defied a High Court injunction to carry out protests around the M25 and on other motorways, have come here to the High Court to answer the defiance of that injunction, which is effectively a contempt of court. Well, today the judges, having listened to the arguments of the 9 protesters who believed that they were on the right side, that they were doing it for the right reasons, that they had, as I say, right on their side and would continue, if they were not jailed today, to carry out these protests, disrupting the orbital motorway around London and other key roads in London and elsewhere. We've seen protests in Dover and in Manchester and in Birmingham. The judge has decided that a custodial sentence is the only sentence that they can pass that sends a clear message to these protesters that the courts will not put up with that. So the 9 protesters, most of them jailed for between 3 and 4 months. One of the protesters, described as having taken a more leading role in the protests, has been jailed for 6 months. So a very significant development. I think a lot of people felt that even though they were in contempt of courts, which the courts often take very seriously, of course, that coming here they would not be jailed. They would potentially be fined, let off with a warning that if they do it again, they will be jailed next time. But the judges said that while they had, of course, a right to protest, that's got to be balanced against the public's right to be able to go about their daily business. And also there were the aggravating factors, the risk factors in carrying out such protests, such as a risk to the public. There was significant disruption when this group of 9 were in defiance of the protests and carried out their protests on the 9th of October. So that protest, according to the judges, resulted in a significant amount of disruption, but also, the judges said, place members of the public at risk and members of the police service at risk who were responding to this incident unfolding in the morning rush hour at junction 25 off the M25 on that day. And of course we've had many other protests that have taken place before and since, and Insulate Britain very deliberately saying that if their members were not sent to jail today, they would be going back out and protesting. For Insulate Britain, you know, it's a win-win. Nobody wants to go to jail, but in terms of their campaign, they have 9 people who have gone to jail for their cause, martyred in a sense as far as Insulate Britain is concerned. But of course the courts feel that this injunction has to be taken very seriously, and a contempt of court with the aggravating factors left them with no choice but to impose this custodial sentence.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Mark, I was reading with some trepidation, actually, reports in the press yesterday about one member of this gang who was saying, I'm terrified of going to prison, I'm terrified of going to jail. You were actually, obviously, in the courtroom when the sentencing was handed down. What were the looks on their faces like?
Well, they were quite defiant. They were shouting out at times, actually, during this sentencing process. And then at the end, when sentence was passed, they broke into song, a little chant about how they were not afraid, that they stood together for a better world. There are many more than just the 9 involved in these protests, of course, and they are defiant, they are determined that they are going to continue to carry out these protests. We are expecting groups of Insulate Britain to come out of court in the coming minutes and to make a statement, the colleagues of those 9 jailed today.
OK. All right, Mark, thank you very much. Obviously, we'll be throwing back as and when that happens, I imagine. Mark White, thank you so much for bringing us that report. But we're going to whiz over right now back to the High Court where Insulate Britain are talking. So let's listen to them for once.
Being committed to prison for demanding that the government fulfil its election pledges by insulating Britain's homes. The 9, aged between 20 and 58 years old, were convicted of contempt of court for breaking the National Highways M25 injunction and have been sentenced to between 3 and 6 months in prison. Anna and Louis received sentences of 3 months, while Ben Taylor, who has announced to the court his intention to continue, has received a sentence of 6 months. All the other defendants were sentenced to 4 months, and the judge has ordered that all defendants should serve at least half. After the sentencing, Emma Smart, 44, announced her intention to go on hunger strike. This is a letter from those brave 9 people. Over the last 9 weeks, 174 ordinary people have held our government to account, asking that they deliver on the most basic of their duties, and that is to protect the British people, the economy, and all we hold dear for our society. Your government has now chosen to act, and it's chosen to imprison us rather than meet the demand. By imprisoning us, the government shows its cowardice. They would rather lock up pensioners than insulate their homes. They would rather lock up teachers than create thousands of proper jobs. They would rather lock up young people than take practical steps to reduce our emissions. They will lock us up and leave thousands to die in the cold this winter. We knew we would face prison when we took this action, but we cannot stand by while this government betrays the general public. Following the widely recognised failure of our government at COP26, we are continuing to ask them to get on with the job of cutting carbon emissions, of insulating cold and leaky houses, of protecting the people of this country from climate collapse, because the lives of our children and those of all future generations hang in the balance. To the government we say, you can't imprison a flood, there are no unlimited fines against a famine, you can't bankrupt a fire. To the public we say, no one is going to save you. In the past, when governments have failed to protect their people, the right thing to do is to highlight the injustice, breaking the law if needed. This is what the suffragettes and Martin Luther King did, and it is what Insulating Britain has done. We call on you.
OK, well, that's a spokesperson from Insulate Prison there, discussing that some of them might be about to go on hunger strike.
I mean, I think she just compared Insulate Britain to the suffragettes and Martin Luther King, which is quite the comparison to make.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, look, a completely sane and well-measured speech from the steps of the High Court after a judge, frankly, did us all a favour and locked some of them up. So we'll be talking to Mark White shortly about that, our home and security affairs.
Yes, indeed, and that's obviously off the back of the news that 9 of them have now been jailed by the High Court. Most of them received 4-month sentences, and one of them received a 6-month sentence for basically telling the judge he would do it again. Yeah, so that's the story.
It's a good way to get yourself nicked, isn't it, really, that anyway. But look, we are just going to return quite quickly to our main story about